Fernando is faster than you.
Hello everybody, Fernando Campos here, back and this time with the first edition of F1 Memories. On this series, guests will come over to share their best experiences with Formula 1, like their first contact with the sport and their best stories about watching a race on track. You might be noticing that things are a little bit different here. You're not seeing me, you're just hearing my voice, and this will be a purely audio series, so sit back, relax, and keep doing your stuff. Don't worry about the video window, because you'll only be listening to us, you won't be seeing our faces, pictures, or anything of that nature. Our guest today is the Box of Neutrals founder and host of the F1 Strategy Report. All the way from Australia, Michael Lamonato will share his best moments not only from a fan point of view, but also from a journalist standpoint as well. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Right, so hello Michael, it's a pleasure to have you here. A little bit of inverse roles today. I'm the host and you're the guest. Usually we have the other way around, but how are you doing today?
Hey mate, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing really well. Pre-season testing we're in the middle of it, so the season's not too far away. My home Australian Grand Prix is not too far away, so yeah, really starting to get warmed up into this new season.
Can you predict anything from what we had from pre-season, or do you think it's still just a blur from what we got?
Look, it's pretty hard to predict except for the fact that Williams is surely last. That's the only thing I can say for sure, right? I mean, what have they had? I haven't actually... I must admit, we're recording this at the end of what would be day 4 of the first test. I haven't actually seen the results, but I can't imagine it went much better for Williams than pretty much the rest of the week. So, yeah, it's looking pretty grim for them. But I think, as far as I've seen, everyone else actually looks pretty good altogether. I mean, I'm sure we'll have the top 3 as usual, but we could be in for a pretty close season, which would be pretty good.
That would be nice. Yeah, I've heard that the midfield pack will be a little bit more bunched up, which is awesome. So let's see what comes around from the 2019 season. So the idea here is really to get the experience from other people regarding Formula One, their first experience, their best memories. So let's start really from the beginning. What is your first memory from Formula One? The first race you remember, or the first really contact that you remember?
Well, the first contact I remember with Formula One was here in Melbourne, of course, because we've had a race since 1996, when I was only 5 years old. So I don't really remember the first race, but I know my parents used to go to them, and I remember the sound of the old engines really spread throughout the city. In fact, now we don't get that so much anymore, I suppose, but we do still get the two-seater car, which goes around, I don't know, about 7 o'clock in the morning here. So on race weekends, you still get to hear it, but only the one car and only very early in the morning. So I always remember the sound, which I think a lot of people in Grand Prix cities have a bit of a connection if they like it. If they don't like it, they probably hate it. But I think everyone has that connection to that sound. And to be honest, I don't remember the first year I went to the race. I went on a free practice day when my dad was at work, so I took his ticket. I went in to see, I suppose it would have been a Friday. And by all accounts, I went with my mum. I hated it. I didn't really like Formula One that first time.
Really?
I went, yeah. I can't tell you exactly why. Maybe it was too loud for me. I'm not sure. Maybe that's why I actually kind of like these new engines. It's a bit more mellow, a bit more relaxed, but just wasn't into it by all accounts. Which is, I suppose this must have been early 2000s maybe. And so I sort of didn't have too much more to do with it after that, but I think really when I first really started following Formula One, I can't say exactly why, but it was the 2008 season. It was the first year I really didn't miss a race. In Australia, broadcast of Formula One it's pretty good now actually. We've got every race and every practice session, but we used to have not really very much. The time zone, of course, doesn't work that well. A lot of races were at 10 o'clock at night or overnight if they were in the Americas, and we used to record a lot of them on VHS, and then, I'd watch them the next morning. And I think that was my final year of high school as well. But I remember taking the time out to watch the Brazilian Grand Prix because, as an Italian family, we were a pretty big fan of Ferrari and Felipe Massa's hopes. But I really very distinctly remember that race and the heartbreak when Felipe lost.
And it's funny because you just mixed up two of my memories, because as a child, I remember saying that, yeah, going to a Formula 1 race must be boring because you just see one part of the track. It's not nice. I believe it's not nice. And here I am going every year to Interlagos, And also, my first real memory, of course, is the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix, and I thought Glock was a backmarker, so I celebrated that day.
Yeah, well, everyone so did Ferrari, I think, for some point in time. It's just sort of, I mean, and this is the thing I tell anybody who wants to get into Formula One. It's difficult to ask someone to go back and watch a race from more than a decade ago now, but it's so, and it's cliche to say it, but it's an ending you couldn't even write if you were making a movie, right? Like Hollywood couldn't even get away with writing that kind of ending because it's so ridiculous and it's so, exactly dramatic, isn't it? Because how could you? Yeah, not even 5 corners, a couple of corners away from the end. You know, he had the championship for a couple of seconds until Hamilton got the position back.
At home,
exactly. And in essentially, it's Hamilton's second season after seeing off Fernando Alonso. It was such a uniquely cinematic kind of moment, such a dramatic moment of storytelling. You couldn't help but get swept up in it. And of course, there was politics behind all of that. And McLaren had been excluded the previous year, and Ferrari was still sort of not sure about their post-Schumacher era. There was so much going on. And you could really see that, right? Like Felipe Massa's always been a bit of an emotional guy, but the podium ceremony is something you can never forget from that race, right? He had so much emotion, and I held himself so well. I think that endeared him forever. He could keep racing and forever at the back if he had to, and people would still love him and want to watch him because of that moment.
Yeah, that was truly remarkable, and the way that he held himself, like you said. And I just remember my first and my second year in Interlagos, of course, because he retired 2 times.
Yes.
But in his first year, I told you this story on the strategy report that year, but he crashed on his way to the finish line, so on the uphill, and that walk from the crash to the pits was in front of us right there. So a lot of people crying. That was an emotional moment. I was one of the people crying, one of the persons crying, but that was incredible. And like you said, if it were a movie, we would say, nah, this is a cheesy ending. This would never happen in real life. Well, last corner, of course not.
Yeah, exactly right. You could never believe something like that. And I think there was just so much disbelief at that point. Even commentators couldn't believe that it was happening. You could never write something like that. And that's such a great example, I think. You can never really tell someone, oh, go back and watch all of 2008. It'll be great and you'll be into Formula One. But if they did, they would be into Formula One.
That's true. And you said that it started really in 2008, but how did it be? It took a time to grow on you, I'm sure. But how did it start to not be just a hobby, and you started to really write and be a broadcaster? How did it grow on you as much to get you to work with Formula One in some aspect?
Well, it's sort of, I mean, it's an interesting story to say how you get into Formula One, say, 2008 was such an emotional ride and went down to the very end. And then I think the real answer to your question here is that in 2009, the season was interesting, Brawn and Jenson Button, that was pretty good, but they mostly dominated. I know it went down to the second last race, didn't it? Well, it got to Brazil as well, but really the answer was all the politics in 2009 is really what got me engaged on the next level. Again, I didn't miss a race in 2009 because, I'd been following on from 2008. But the idea of the breakaway series, maybe you remember from 2009, negotiations over the Concord Agreement, and certain teams were going to leave Formula One, and there was a stand, I think it was Williams and Force India in particular, said that they weren't going to. And then, of course, this was in the shadow of the global financial crisis. A whole bunch of manufacturers did leave, but not to start their own series.
Scandal.
Yeah, and then, of course, the following season, we found out that in 2009 for 2008.
Yeah, the same season,
yeah, exactly. We had this Crashgate, and there was investigations, and there were hearings. There was so much going on in 2009 off the track that you couldn't help but be really engaged by the whole world of Formula One. I know that kind of stuff does happen periodically in F1. Like, there's so much ego and so much money. How can it not happen from time to time? But I just thought 2009 was such a great example. And yeah, on top of all of that, you did have this story on track of not just that Brawn and Jenson Button won the title, but the fact that that team had essentially collapsed the year before, hadn't really been bought. Ross bought it for $1 because no one else wanted it. And they had all of a sudden they rocked up at pre-season testing, had the quickest car, and was the quickest car for most of the year. You know, it was a pretty good story in that sense as well. So I think even though the conclusion wasn't as good as 2008, the story of 2009 on and off the track was just so compelling. And that's really when it started for me that I really started to want to get involved in this sport.
The one thing that I remember from the 2009 season, the thing that it sticks out the most, is that Malaysian Grand Prix that gave the drivers points in half, and a lot of drivers had a 0.5 in their score. That bothered me so much. So much.
It's an annoying score. Imagine going home from a race with 1/2 of a point, with 0.5 of a point. Yeah. It'd be annoying as well.
And I thought that would happen in that Brazilian Grand Prix that rained a lot. We had an interruption of the race, so
yeah, that's right.
Really, am I gonna see that live now? But then the race came back. But I remember that day of the 0.5 point, and remembering, like, I remember specifically that Truly got 0.5 point for something, and I remember seeing his score and like, Jesus, I will have to see this 0.5 point for the rest of the season now.
Yeah. Or you have to hope that he scores another 0.5 point somewhere else somehow and rounds the number out. I do, I remember that, because that was also the Kimi Räikkönen ice cream race as well. How could we forget that?
That was the same. That's perfect. Good memory. What was the first race that you attended?
Well, the first race. Well, I don't remember that first race I went to in the early. Yeah, that one practice session. But I was at the 2009 Australian Grand Prix. I think that was the first full weekend, sort of from Thursday. So the Australian Grand Prix has a Thursday here as well, which has support races and also just other things, like driver autographs or whatever. But I remember 2009 was the first full weekend I went to, I'm pretty sure, in Australia. And I haven't missed an Australian Grand Prix since then. I almost missed last year's one, actually, when I had the most excuse to go because I had terrible food poisoning. Not a very interesting story, but I almost decided not to go. I think I rocked up an hour or just before the race because I really had to give myself time to get into it.
Terrible timing to get food poisoned.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, of all the races as well, my home race, so much hype and, so much, the first race of the year, and then all of a sudden, can't even remember what I ate. And then, anyway, it was a pretty bad 24 hours, but I got there in the end, so that was good. I don't think the race was that memorable though, so I don't know whether it was worth getting out of bed for it, but it was okay. Look, we had an okay season.
You kept this streak alive.
Exactly. Most importantly, I kept it alive, which is that counts, I think. Well, that's 10 years, I've just realised. Actually, now you've said that. So, but the first was 2009. I hadn't even thought about that. The streak is alive. Yeah, exactly. Imagine missing the anniversary race, the 10th race. So, yeah, I'm glad I went. But the first overseas race I did would have been to the 2012 Malaysian Grand Prix, I'm pretty sure. I remember because, so when I sort of started getting more involved, not just in Formula 1, but doing the radio show originally, I think the first season of that was 2010, because I'd met a guy at the community radio station we were doing stuff at, and he happened to go to my university as well, and we started this show, Box of Neutrals, which is still going, so that's also about nearly a decade old. And we started doing races, and we ended up going to this same commercial radio school in 2012, and we'd be doing this show for a little while. And this show we were doing also was being broadcast, strangely enough, still is actually, in this station in Thailand, of all places. We had some guy who worked there, really liked Formula 1, wanted some sport content, and so we started sending him this, and all of a sudden we got this email saying, the Malaysian Grand Prix is happening, and they're doing some sponsorship with us, so we did some ads for them. And then all of a sudden they sent everyone to the Malaysian Grand Prix, and we sort of didn't realise it at first. We thought they were joking, and then all of a sudden they were like, nah, next week, because it was back-to-back with Australia at the time, make sure you book your flights, because we've got a hotel room and everything.
Oh, wow.
So we booked these last-minute flights that week, and we left on Friday night. We took the overnight flight on Friday night, got there Saturday morning, didn't sleep at all, because sleeping on airplanes is real hard. Was pretty much unconscious during the day trying to watch qualifying. Turned out we were all sharing this one hotel room, so I think I slept on the floor from memory. I think we brought in some pillows or something. Then watched the race on Saturday, which was really great. You know, we had seats right at turn 1, which is a pretty good place to watch in Malaysia. Because you see all the way down the straight, you see the first, second corner, and there's also a little screen there so you can see what's going on. But then that race from memory was the first one. No, it wouldn't have been. The first one must have been 2009 because of that rain. But they'd moved the race later. 2009 was a disaster because they moved the race later in the afternoon. It pretty much always rains in Malaysia at that time of year, like 4 o'clock, let's say. And so they brought it slightly earlier, but it still rained in that race. Not as bad. From memory, it was the start of the race, wasn't it? Like, they got through a couple of laps. There was a crash. Maybe it was Fernando Alonso. I can't remember.
Yeah, it wasn't the race from Perez and Alonso, right? It was 2013.
Yeah, that was the following year, I think. Yeah. But
it was the following year.
Yeah, but this one... it was delayed a little bit anyway. So it was delayed because of this rain.
Right.
And we were flying out that night because we had to be back at university on Monday morning.
I know that feeling. I know that feeling too.
Yeah, exactly. And so suddenly, you know, we're getting to the end of the race and we're like... we've got to leave in, 2.5 hours. Like, we've got to be at the airport. Luckily, the airport's sort of right next door to the track, but the traffic outside the circuit and the way the police were controlling it, we only just made it. So it was a real, dash to the race to start the weekend and then dash back to the airport. But, I'll never forget that weekend because it was just so crazy, such a crazy experience. And yeah, I mean, I've been to all but one Malaysian Grand Prix since then, and now obviously it's off the calendar. So yeah, I had a bit of an attachment to that race because it was the first overseas one, so it was a little bit sad to see it go.
Hey, it was very quote unquote, right, very close to you, so it's better to attend.
Yeah.
And apart from Australia and Malaysia, did you go to, I think you went to Japan, you said? But I might be mistaken.
Yeah, so I think I've been to all the Asian rounds now. So I've been to the Japanese Grand Prix, and I've also done Singapore and more recently China. I can't remember what year the first Japanese Grand Prix was. It might have been 2014, let's say. And if anyone's ever been to the Japanese Grand Prix, you probably know that accommodation's kind of difficult. You can stay in Nagoya, which is the closest city, and then you've got about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the track, which is not so bad. And Nagoya is a big city, so there's a lot to do. But the first year we tried to stay in this town, I was traveling with two other colleagues of mine, two friends of mine from Australia. And we just had, I don't know if we must have left it late or whatever, but there were just no hotels. There's nothing we could book. And completely by chance, we got this hotel in a town called Shiroko, which is just 2 stops up the train line, I think. So fairly close, but it had only 1 bed in it. And so there were 3 of us. I'm like, what are we going to do? We've got no other options. So we booked this room, and we had to... because they're very strict in Japan as well about no one that isn't in the room is meant to be up in the room. I think it depends a bit on the hotel. But so we all had to... one of us checked in, whoever it was who was on the booking. All I remember, it wasn't me because I was standing outside in the dark just waiting. And they went up to the room, waited 20 minutes, came downstairs, then the second person would go up on their own, and then the third person. And in my bag I had... an inflatable mattress, and so we'd go up there, and eventually we all got up there together. Took an hour to get up there, and then we'd inflate the inflatable mattress quite late by now. Went to sleep, and then every morning we'd have to deflate it so that none of the room keepers would come in and go, it seems like there might be more than one person sleeping in this one person room. But I got lucky because 2 of the other guys, they ended up sharing a bed, and they were fairly uncomfortable in that experience. So at least I got my own bed.
It was good to settle for the air mattress then.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't so upset by that one, but that was also a fairly interesting first race experience.
Did you happen to go to the Korean Grand Prix as well?
No, actually, I never got to that one. One of the other guys who does Box of Neutrals did. He went to I think it might have been the first one. I'm not 100% sure. Actually, no, it wouldn't have been the first one. It must have been one of the other ones. Not that it lasted that long. That would have been interesting. Although I guess the biggest problem with that one was that it was just really in the middle of nowhere, I think. It was built in a swamp, essentially, and built during the global financial crisis. So all of their big plans never came to be. So no, I never end up getting that race, unfortunately. If they ever get another one back to... there was always rumour that they might have a race closer to Seoul. That'd be pretty good to go to, I think.
Yeah, you have Vietnam now, which is another one to look forward to.
Yeah, that will be interesting. I mean, Vietnam's getting pretty popular now with Australians. Again, because it's a country that's relatively close to Australia. Only about 8 hours by airplane, which is practically next door for us. That'll be pretty exciting. I am looking forward to that one.
Nice. And how was the experience in Singapore? I believe that's a pretty. I mean, it's quite an spectacle. The whole circumstance, the whole place is quite a show, let's say. But how was the experience of watching the race there?
Yeah, Singapore is having not done all of the races, of course, but Singapore is a pretty unique experience because the city is just really incredible. Like you're in this humid, almost jungle-like environment, but it's this super modern city. And the night race, I think, really plays into that. I think it's a really great place to have the night race. It also means that you don't have to go out in the sunshine so much because it's so hot. It's unbelievable. But it's this really unique experience as well of all of Formula One stays on European time. You probably hear this all the time. You know, they say it in the television, all that kind of stuff. But I've done that a couple of times now, and it's so in some respects it's kind of annoying because, you know, coming from Australia, like, it's in pretty much our time zones, only an hour behind. We're gonna have a great time. Fly in, fly out, it's great. But you have to jet lag yourself to do it, to come from Australia. Like everyone else has this great time, they just fly straight in, pretend they're still in London, you know, going out, having a drink at 4 a.m. or whatever. Because that's just dinner time for them or whatever. And I'm sitting there at 4 a.m. because you've got to try. This is the first thing I learned the first time. You can't do it on the Australian time zone because, you know, the race doesn't finish till 10 o'clock, I think, there. Mm-hmm. And I think qualifying's an hour later. And, you know, when you're doing the press circuit there, you've got so many interviews to do afterwards. You've got all your coverage to write. You know, you don't finish till 2 or 3 in the morning. And if you're in Australian time, that's just a disaster. There's no way you're working effectively at that time. So you have to pretend as well. Like, so I try and take an overnight flight and stay up the first night as much as you can and try and wake up late. It's difficult. But if you do end up doing that, if you come from Europe or another time zone, you choose to do the European time, you know, at 2 a.m. or whatever time is effectively dinner time, you go out and the whole city is yours. You know, you have the whole city to yourself, and there are still, you know, various places open. Lots of the hawker markets and things like that will remain open at that time. And you just have this really unique experience of this city that's occupied by F1 fans and, you know, people working there from Europe and the teams and stuff. And you're out in the middle of every night. Yeah, it's just such a unique experience. I think Singapore's a really good race to do. And even if you don't do the European time zone thing, the advantage is that you still have all day to be a tourist in Singapore. You know, you can go out and see all the things you want to see. And then, you know, you don't have to be qualifying till, I think qualifying's at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. And, you know, the first practice session would be at 5 o'clock or whatever that is. So you actually get a pretty full experience as opposed to one of the races where it's on during the day. So all your days are occupied by races and then maybe you go out at night. It's a good race to do. I would recommend.
Right. That's nice. That's good to know. And how about China? How was the experience of going to Shanghai to watch the Grand Prix?
China's completely different. Like, it's sort of... So I've only started doing the Chinese Grand Prix in the last 2 years, so I haven't had the experiences that they had when they began there. But what people say is that, because the track is quite far out of Shanghai, notably far out of Shanghai. I think I caught a taxi there from the middle of the city last year, and I reckon I was in the car for at least an hour. Like, it was far. An hour on highways as well, not just driving through traffic or anything like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's far. And so when you get there, you're just sort of amongst, you know, it's a little bit industrial. There are a lot of apartments. You can see it on the television often. But apparently when the race started there was not really anything around there. And so it just sort of speaks to how quickly Shanghai is growing and how quickly they can build stuff there. That it's all surrounded by there. The Chinese Grand Prix is very interesting. They go to a lot of effort to put on the show. The overriding, anyone who's been to cover the Chinese Grand Prix, the overriding emotion is that the paddock is enormous. Like, it's too big. Like, you see it on television. You see, like, those nice little huts in the water, which look lovely. Like, the idea was great, but they're not connected in any logical way. So many times, like, you'll get to the hut, and every team gets 2. That's the other thing. So, you know, the engineers get 1, and then, like, the hospitality and press area, which is where you want to go as a journalist, gets another 1. And the number of times you'll get to one hut, and it'll end up being the engineer's hut, and then you look across the water, and you can see everyone else that you intend to be with doing the interview. You can't get there either. You have to go all the way out to this huge empty paddock area where the garages are. It just takes forever to navigate. It's so big. Like, it's a nice idea, but it's huge. You do so much. I guess you do so much walking, which is good, but Oh, it's really a workout and a real mental exercise. I just wish one year they'd give us a map of where everything is. It'd be really good.
Give me orientation on this maze, for the love
Yeah.
of God, because I'm getting lost here all the time.
Everyone should arrive early and then they can do a guided tour and then maybe we can all remember where it was. Last year it was so
paddock
frustrating.
walk.
Yeah, because I had to get to a Pirelli thing and I couldn't find it. It turned out to be in a very easy place, but I think I overthought it. But as I was looking and as like the clock ticked over to whatever time it was, 5:30 when it was starting, just the biggest rain shower. Like I was caught in a huge storm, didn't have an umbrella, was absolutely soaked and gave up. I was so upset. I got up to the media center. My notebook was soaked through, couldn't open any of the pages. And then I got a cold that weekend. It was an emotional day, but it's good fun. They do put on a bit of a show, but it's definitely a unique race.
It's funny to see this many different experiences, right? Go to Singapore, which is quite a show. Then China with its big paddock with no map and no Waze, so you kind of get lost. And you reminded me of something. I didn't think about that at the start. The Australian Grand Prix, a part of it is a street race, of course. And how is the logistics for the people who live in Melbourne to see that changing and to have to remember that there is a track being built there in the middle of the street? How do the people who live there deal with the situation of the track being built?
I think you either fall into two camps in Melbourne. You're either, a fan of the race and you don't live nearby, or you live nearby and you hate the race, is pretty much how it works. I actually live not that far from Albert Park. I live sometimes I drive through it if I want to get to the city, as an example, or at least drive right past it. We've been doing this for now 23 or 4 years now. We've been doing
23,
this.
I believe.
Yeah.
The first one was 96,
Yeah,
right?
first one was 96. So this will be the 23rd race? Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yep.
If my math serves me correctly. And they have gotten really good at doing it quickly. Like they leave it to quite late. Whereas once they might have started, I don't know, at the end of December or start of January or something. Now they've only really, I drove through it only maybe 2 weeks ago and they were only just starting to put up the grandstands because they do it really quickly. Like they're really efficient at doing it, at setting it all up, because it's more or less the same setup every year. Of course, they add one or two. I think they've added a couple of stands, but I did notice, I was trying to go to the city last weekend and the traffic was really quite bad, and it was because Albert Park was closed. I don't know if it's closed permanently now for the race, but it was definitely closed because they were doing something. And I got annoyed because I live here now and there's traffic around Albert Park and it's irritating. But it's okay. It's not so bad. Albert Park, it is a street track and it is used, the streets, legitimately during the year, but they're not very big streets. There's like a major road right next to it, so it's not the end of the world, but it does annoy people, and now I know a little bit about it, because actually, when we were doing stuff at the ABC, one of the producers there he must live even closer, he must live pretty much on the park, and he got annoyed because part of his running track gets closed, and I was like, come on, just choose a different running track. Just take a detour, because the park is not itself closed until I think the week of the race, maybe the Tuesday. So the park's still open, just not the roads, obviously. But I think for a week you can run around it. You can run somewhere else.
I always thought that the Friday would be the biggest problem because, of course, most of the people are going to work and going to school and so on. But is it closed from Tuesday then? It's pretty much the whole week closed. Yeah,
the roads are not open during the event at all. It's not like Monaco. It's same as Singapore. Singapore doesn't open its roads either, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe it does. Maybe I'm wrong. They open them on Monday, whereas Albert Park is not even open on Monday, I'm fairly sure. They probably don't open it until later that week. So it's closed. The roads are closed for about 2 weeks. The park is closed maybe just for the duration, maybe from Tuesday till Monday. Maybe you can get back into the park on Monday. But that's it. So they've reduced it to only like proper closure for 2 weeks. And then, of course, look, you do end up working around. There's a lot of construction. So it's congested there. But you can still get in after the race. So they've done a good job. Because Albert Park is one of the city's bigger parks. And there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of sports facilities there. The pits during the year are actually basketball courts.
Oh, really?
Which maybe some people don't know.
Nice.
Basketball or court and other courts, I suppose, in there. So they lose that for a couple of weeks. But it's a debate that goes on forever in Melbourne. There are people who want the race and people who don't. one of the arguments people who say the race is good make is that before the Grand Prix came in 1996, Albert Park was, and I can't vouch for this, obviously, being only 5 years old at the time, but Albert Park was a bit of a wasteland, like a little bit neglected. But because the Grand Prix came there and they built the pit facilities and then built everything around it, they sort of rejuvenated it a little bit. I don't know how true that is, but I've been told that is correct. So there's reasons that it's brought some good things at least to the park. But then people say, can't use the park. But it's worth saying, there's a pond in the middle of it and the geese are always there. They always come back, so it doesn't disturb them too much.
And if you could choose one race to go anywhere in the world, you don't need to think about logistics, you're just going to this race, which one would it be?
Oh, it's pretty hard. I would have definitely said, had you asked me middle of last year, I would definitely have said Japan, because other than just the race, like the fans are great in Japan, like everyone's so enthusiastic. And in that really unique Japanese way, like it's not just enthusiastic for the race, but they're passionate about the race. Like the people who go there are just really committed. You hear the stories, you see the photos, the fans are in there, even on Thursday, way after dark, just watching the team set up and, they watch some things on the big screen. Like they're really into it. They're really great. And also just because I really love Japan. It's such a terrific country and the people, whether or not they're Formula One fans, are terrific people. So polite and welcoming. I try to make sure I go to the Japanese Grand Prix every year just because I really enjoy it. But last year I also went for the first time to the Mexican Grand Prix, and that is a really cool experience. They also do. It's no surprise that I think every year they've been on the calendar, they've won Best Promoter of the Year.
Yeah, like 3 years in a row, something like that.
Yeah, exactly, because they just do such a good job there of promoting it. That's another next level enthusiastic crowd, because you see like that baseball stadium section, they just fill it up. And I was watching Formula E last week and it was full for that, which is incredible.
That's true. I thought about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there are a lot of people in Mexico City, but still, it's impressive to me. That would be a really cool race. And I was at the first US Grand Prix in Austin 2012, and I went again last year. And that is also, I don't know exactly what it's like now. In 2012, they were putting in a lot of effort and stuff to entertain the fans. And I'm sure they're doing the same thing now. I can only assume that's even improved. But Austin is such a cool place to go for the race as well. I must admit, in 2012, I guess it was because it was the first race, the city really was absorbed by Formula One. They had street festivals for Formula One. You'd walk past restaurants and bars and they'd offer you a discount if you had a Formula One ticket. This year, it felt a little bit less so. They had... they didn't really get the sense that the race was on as much in the city. The city's grown a little bit since 2012, but not heaps, obviously. There's talk about maybe the race is on its way out in Austin, unfortunately, because Formula One wants a race. Not that they want a race that isn't Austin, but they definitely, they went a big way to trying to get a race in Miami. There's this talk about a race in Las Vegas. Whether or not the US can sustain two races if they're right near each other. There are a lot of questions about how viable this race might be in the future, which would be a real shame because Austin is a really good... they talk about destination cities and stuff. I think Austin is the destination city more so than Miami, and I reckon probably more so than Las Vegas. Vegas would look good at night, I guess, but it's really just a lot of casinos, isn't it? Whereas Austin has this great... they've got an event culture. They're all about festivals and they're all about, hosting people there. And, it's this really unique part of Texas where you've still got that kind of, people genuinely, non-ironically walking around in those cowboy hats. But, it's also a university city. So there's this really great vibe there. I just think it would be such a shame if Formula One's pursuing, quote unquote event cities or destination cities, that Austin might not fall into that category, because it absolutely should be there.
Nice. Michael, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you here. Tell the people where they can find you on the internet, please. Twitter, Facebook, the programs. Where can people find you on the internet?
So you can find me at Michael Lamonato on Twitter. If you can't spell that, just search for Box of Neutrals, which is that first podcast we spoke about that I started this whole thing. And you can also find me on the Strategy Report, which will be starting more during the season, of which your fine self does make several appearances now. You've been up to your third, I think, and
Yeah.
we'll be talking to you again, I hope, for the Brazilian Grand Prix.
Oh, nice. Thank you for the early
Well,
invitation.
we'll sort it out now. Yeah, we may as well just confirm it all now. That's where you can find me on Twitter, and if you know my address, you can always welcome to come up for a visit as well.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fernando. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for today, guys. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to check out our social media links at Nando is Faster on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also, don't forget to check out Michael and his projects. You're seeing all of the links on the screen at Michael Lamonato on Twitter, at Box of Neutrals, and at F1 Strategy Report. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!